And the king of Egypt spake to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of the one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the birthing stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. And that's that instrumental usage that you were talking about before.
There is a huge issue here. The Hebrew is completely indeterminative whether the midwives were Hebrews or not. Mialdot ha'ivriot, and I'm not going to throw out Hebrew often. I feel very self-conscious at all. But for those who know Hebrew, they will know what I'm talking about. It can be the Hebrew midwives or the midwives of the Hebrews. There is no possible way, based on those two words, to know which it is.
Are the midwives, in fact, Hebrew, or are they not? And he says that it's obviously ambiguous. I'll say that I don't know why he thinks it's so ambiguous. He would have to go into more detail about that. And grammar is the identification of patterns of language. And this is how we typically put words together. This is particularly how we know when you're stopping, when you have a question. That's grammar. Those are grammar. In English grammar, if I want to use an adjective, which is a word that describes a noun, I place it before the noun. Green car, cold nose. Those describe the noun and they come before. Well, Hebrew has its own rule about placing adjectives and nouns. The typical pattern is the adjective comes after the noun. So instead of saying green car, you would say car green, nose cold. And that's the pattern we have here in this text. The Hebrew midwives, right, is the noun is mentioned before the adjective. So from the typical pattern of Hebrew language, I think that the traditional understanding that these are Hebrew midwives and not what he wants to say, I think that there's a clear amount of evidence on our side. Now, I don't really think there's a mystery there. I think it's pretty clear that it's a Hebrew midwife.
I mean, post-biblical Jewish tradition. The Torah, I think, does agree with me, but c'est la vie. I believe they were Egyptian.
Every time you want to go your own way, you just say, well, post-biblical, they had an opinion, and but the Bible itself, the Bible agrees with me 100%. But the post-biblical people, those guys, those characters, what were they up to, right? So I just keep feeling like this whole Bible study is about let's share our opinions and read it into the text, less about what does the text say. That's my issue right now.
I do not believe he would have ordered Hebrew midwives to murder every Hebrew boy.
Sure he would. Why not? It's a lot easier than having non-Hebrew midwives. Why would the Jews let the non-Hebrew midwives in? Hire them and trust them to deliver the babies when they're being persecuted. Number one, they're slaves. So how are they affording these midwives? And if you want to say that Pharaoh made a command that the Jewish women have to give birth to the non-Jewish midwives, then he has to impose the non-Jewish midwives there, then he probably needs to send some soldiers with them to make sure it's being done correctly. As the midwives are delivering, if the midwives don't do it, the soldiers could just kill them. But more than likely, the best way to make sure that he's going to kill these boys is if the women trust the midwives. And the best way to trust a midwife is to make her from your people.
Do you think there's a purposeful ambiguity there to leave it up to question?
That's beautiful. It may well be. That's right. Well, it certainly is. The Hebrew is ambiguous. That is correct.
Because, I mean, if a tyranny gets corrupt enough, then people turn against themselves.
That's right. However, just on logical grounds, when he gets angry at them for not doing it, it would be odd he'd get angry at Hebrews for not killing Hebrews. But my biggest...
If they were non-Jewish midwives, his reaction should have been surprise, not anger. There's no reason for a non-Jewish midwife to not kill the baby. They would obviously follow the orders of Pharaoh. It'd be more surprising if that wasn't the case. Him getting angry at the midwives is because he's suspecting that he's being ignored. It's telling him where their loyalties lie. They don't lie with Pharaoh. They lie with the Jewish people. They lie with God.
It's proof you're coming to where it says that they feared God and didn't listen to Pharaoh. Again, it's one of my favorite lines in the whole Bible. You either fear humans or you fear God. Fear God is the root of freedom
wisdom,
and wisdom.
So I don't understand how that supports his claims about the midwives being non-Jewish, because non-Jews can also believe in God. He's giving us reasons from logic, and this is the problem. Once again, like, you don't reason from outside the text and then put that on and say, well, this doesn't make any sense to me.
It's not Jehovah or Yahweh, it's Elohim. So when Jews fear God, it's generally fear Yahweh, and in this case, it's fear Elohim, the universal word for God, and I am convinced that they are Egyptians.
But is that enough to overcome the typical usage of the grammar? I don't think so. I think it's an interesting point he brings up. I don't think it really supports his case for how we interpret that verse very well. And I think that this is a pretty typical Bible study where everybody's just kind of sitting around and talking about their specialty in relation to the Bible. Dennis seems to be the only one so far who has attempted to actually talk about the text, but even with him, he's sort of imposing his own worldview and what does the text say, I feel like. Because I'll say this, he made the point that he disagrees with the traditional answer. Those opinions are so well made, so well thought out, so strong and powerful that you've really got to know what you're talking about. I don't know what level of Jewish education Dennis Prager has, but we're talking about men who had mastered the entirety of the Talmud, of the Tanakh, of reading in Hebrew, Aramaic, French, Ladino, different languages. These, and bringing these salient points together, understanding the halakha, why we do it, the ins and outs. Can Dennis claim that level of knowledge? And if he can't, that makes me suspicious that as to whether or not he's actually has an opinion that is going to be defensible in the light of what the traditional answer is, because the traditional answer is given with so much careful thought over thousands of years. But I think he's the only one so far who's demonstrated an attempt to understand the text.
I want to pick up on what you said, Dennis, a little before, and I want to propose that there might be a very important narrative reason why the midwives are Hebrew in this case. And the reason, I think it's a good lesson for us today, which is that the tyrant is empowering women to kill their men. That is what the tyrant is doing. Mm-hmm. And he's doing it in order to feminize the Hebrews. And I think that
no wonder you get in trouble all the time.
But I think that it's important, and the reason why they won't do it is because they fear God, is because they're able to see beyond the power that the Pharaoh is handing them at this moment. And I think that when we think that couldn't happen, like in a people, it's like, look around you. We're seeing it happen before our very eyes.
It's so interesting because it also implies
one of the big reasons we have for concluding that also these are Hebrew midwives beyond the grammar is the theme of the story, that going from this point forward throughout the rest of the Tanakh, what we see is the women are constantly saving the men. And it's always the women who step up to the plate because of the men's constant mistakes and actions. The Jews would have been wiped out. It's interesting to note that in all the major problems facing the Jewish people during this time, the men are the only ones taking part. It's the men who took part in the golden calf. They stole the jewelry from their wives to be able to make the golden calf. The women didn't willingly give the gold and everything to the golden calf. And in all these instances, the golden calf, the rebellion of Korah, who There was no women that were participating in that. The women were not there for the sin of the spies. They didn't speak negatively against God. In fact, when it came to giving for the Mishkan, the women donated so much stuff, so enthusiastically, that Aaron and Moses had tell them, stop, it's enough. We've got more than enough, right? And so it makes sense that these midwives are actually Hebrew, because here the male children are being born, and it's the Jewish women that need to protect them and keep them out of the hands of Pharaoh. And that is a consistent theme that seems to be going from this point forward. The women intercede to preserve the men.
That, well, it's in the best interest of the tyrant to dispense with those figures who might pose a threat to the tyranny.
That's right.
And those would be tough men.
That would be the men.
Right?
No, I think they're wrong here. It's not the tough men. I think the mistake they're making here is ascribing everything to the tough men. The tough men are the ones who keep messing it all up. Who keeps complaining in the desert? It's usually the men. Right? I'm not saying there aren't any women who complain, but it's the women who sing the praises of God at the sea. Now, there are some men who step up, for sure, but it's actually because of the tough women, the women who believe in God and trust in God and fear God. These are the ones that preserve the Jewish people. These are the ones who are able to propagate and encourage the Jewish people. So anyway, I think that guy was getting it right, but then I think his machismo might have kicked in a little bit. He's like, oh, that's why men, and I think the whole story here is actually the women.
Because they are the ones who keep the real
That's such an
tyrants at bay.
intelligent point that it reinforces your reaction to what I said. Maybe the text is purposefully ambiguous about whether or not they were Hebrews or Egyptians.
Yeah.
And you've swayed me.
Well,
I think
I've seen that purposeful ambiguity in other texts.
So let me just say, I know I identify a bias in me, and I will reveal it. I'm very, I hope, self-aware.
Good. So the first learning episode has actually occurred.
Yeah, exactly.